momentarily. You'll notice that we'll be live momentarily. Okay, good morning, or sorry, good afternoon, and welcome back to part 2 of the Reaction Studio final review and panel discussion. I am Dr. Bliss, and I am here with my 16 wonderful students and esteemed panelists, including Dr. John Stallmeyer, who is an associate professor at the University of Illinois, Professor Bross, who is an assistant professor at the University of Illinois, and again, Dr. Jerry Ann Bliss, MD, who is our medical expert for the purpose of these panels. As a reminder to what we're talking about here today is a discussion about COVID-19 testing and contact tracing facilities. So I'll briefly share some information about what our students were tasked with doing here. So the students were asked to create a reaction, and a reaction is a response experience for active contagion tracking innovation organization nexus. They were asked to think about creating spaces for both testing and contact tracing, and then also a little bit about future use and what that might mean. Currently, there are, pardon me, we're having a technical difficulty moment here. Currently, there are over 11.5 million cases in the world and over 500,000 deaths as of yesterday evening. In the US, we're looking at almost 3 million, and they'll probably top that today. So the students were tasked then with choosing a site, temporary or permanent, based on the needs of their community or a community that they felt like needed a testing facility. What we're going to be doing this afternoon is continuing with our discussions around how students are responding to this pandemic. And what we find is that this morning we talked about really temporary and mobile solutions, and this afternoon we'll talk about more permanent solutions. So this afternoon we'll be talking about reactions for a cause, or students who are looking at using this reaction as a way to facilitate an architectural response to a cause outside of COVID, but also looking at permanent structures and memorial structures related to COVID-19. The way that this will happen is that students will present in a back-to-back fashion, and there'll be time for a panel discussion after each set of presentations. I will ask that all of our panelists mute their mics and their cameras while students are presenting so that they may share their screen. And if there are any questions, please submit those to our YouTube chat if you're watching from home. So with that, I'm going to ask Yadi Z to present first on her green pods as a solution for COVID.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Yadi, and here's my proposal for my approach to the COVID-19 pandemic pop-up testing center and also the contact tracing facility. So the name of my project is Green Pods, and this is a multi-function facility that's going to serve for the current purpose as a testing and contact tracing, but also for the future use as a vaccine reception and also the medical education pavilion. I would start with the function and my project information for this review. The project programs will be divided up into 3 parts mainly. The first part will be the rapid testing, including the drive-through and in-person sample collection. The samples will be collected by this facility and then packed and labeled and shipped to the other medical facilities, such as the Carle Hospital and the other hospitals, to get the examination done. And the results will come back and sent through email or other digital ways to the registered public. The second part for the project will be staff support. This part will include decontamination space, break room space, and also meeting space. The third part will be the contact tracing office. This office will address the approach to collect information from the public and then find out the potential cases and contact them. So my site is located in Champaign City, Illinois. Since I'm going to serve the local community, the site is located at Parkland College on the west side of the town. The reason I picked this site is I was looking for a site that can serve the purpose of circulation. So especially for the drive-through. There are two major parking lots in Champaign City. One is the mall, which is the marketplace. And the other one will be the Parkland College. The reason I picked the Parkland College instead of the mall is that the mall has a much larger population gathering, while the Parkland College is on the west side, far west side of the town. So the facility is not only going to serve for the local community, it's also going to serve for the university and also the rural areas such as Mahomey, Rantoul, and St. Joseph. These areas will be 30 minutes to 40 minutes driving from the Champaign cities, which is also why Parkland College parking lot would be the perfect location for those cities, because it's right next to I-72 and I-74 interstate. So to approach to the facility for the drive-through person, all the traffic will be guided from Bradley Avenue and then enter Primary Road and then enter the parking lot from the east side of the east side of Parkland College and then circulate around in the parking lot. Another merit for this site is that there's a bus stop just right next to my chosen site. And that will take the in-person public to my design project. And for staff, also emergency or service traffic, there will be guide from the other entrance to the facility. Starting with my concept, I started by a grid system, which is 5 feet by 5 feet block. The reason it's 5 feet by 5 feet is that when you have your arms wide open, that's a dimension. You have a comfortable zone when you're interfering with the other people. And I divide up the whole part depends on my function. So the center one will serve the core, which is the decontamination and also the down and the doff space. To approach to the pandemic, I started off with thinking about the sustainability and prefabrication in my project. The reason I chose prefabrication is that we need something low cost, self-efficient, and also efficient construction, which requires less labor on site, especially during pandemic situation. For sustainability wise, this is because I was thinking about how the users, especially the staff inside, also to mention that the interior space will only be accessible for the staff. So all the public visitors will not enter the space. So when I think about having a rapid construction on site, I think about, does the users inside have to sacrifice themselves like we're doing now? They are under a certain tent and without any environmental control around them. Also thinking about the future use, how would I reduce the waste from the facility if it has to be removed? And what would I improve it if it's going to be used in the future? So coming to several technical drawings will address my approach to the pandemic pop-up testing center. The entrance will be on the south side of the facility, and that is separate from the in-person testing window, which is on the southwest corner of the facility. After entering the space from the east side, they go from a ramp, which is 1.5 feet above the ground, because all the power bank and water storage will be stored under the facility. So the ramp will take the medical staff into two separate rooms. One is for men and another is for women, so they can get changed and prepared. After entering the down space, they will be divided up into two groups. One is for the lab and the other one will be for the office. and everything from there will be one-way circulated. The circulation, I will show that in the following page, just in a minute. Drive-through lines are divided up into two lanes. One is and also the information stand will be outside under the canopy just for a quick information check and background check. So in-person window will be next to the patio. And the patio for staff is on the farthest corner from the testing window, which is another emphasis in this project because the staff will be separate from the chaotic outside to provide a relatively quiet space, meditation space for them to rest between their shifts. And the emergency vehicle will be driven to the backside of the facility that is also separate from the drive-through line. So here's the technical drawing, just showing the three parts of this facility. And coming to the circulation part, this is the one of the big parts of my design project is that I divide up all the circulations. So as you can see here, the in-person testing circulation will be different from the emergency and also the staff. And as the staff enter the facility, they go through the down process. And after they're done or off their shift, they come back to the off space. And then from there, they can go back to the down space again, either exit the facility as they off their work, or they get new PPE equipment again, and then go back to work. So here's the two renderings just showing the two different parts of the building. The left side is the break room patio. This is on the different corner of the facility just to be separate from the in-person testing window. And on the right side, that's the in-person testing window and the drive-through canopy. So coming to the sustainability part, I think about four parts mainly. One is the solar energy use. So the solar panels will be located on the roof. That's not just for the energy generator, but also for the floor heating system. So rainwater will be collected and purified under the facility. And this is a additional supply on top of the water tank supply. And also the ventilation in the facility will be from the window on the south side and to the back side. Also, some of the shading system I've been added to the design projects just to provide more shading for the interior space. For example, screens are added to the office, and also they are added to the entrance just to provide more privacy as they enter the space. On the left side is a detail for the lab. As you can see, the shading will be canopied outside the intaking patio. So there could be vegetations grow up on the canopy in the future when it's being developed into a vaccine and medical education pavilion. So this will provide more a friendly interior space. That's pretty much about my project. Thank you.
Thank you, Yadi, for your presentation. Now we'll have Hannah Brostoff present her resilience project, which has a mind toward social work and high schools in Chicago public school system. Hannah. Don't forget to unmute yourself.
Okay, can you see my screen in full screen or is it half screen?
You're doing fine.
Okay. Okay. My name is Hannah Brostoff. My reaction is called Resilience and is a COVID-19 testing facility and social work space. There are currently over 148,000 confirmed coronavirus cases in Illinois. Over a third of these cases have been in Chicago alone. 1 out of every 50 Chicagoans has tested positive for the coronavirus, and the numbers keep rising as the state moves towards restoration. After studying the demographics of the city, neighborhoods' risk factor scores, social vulnerability indexes, and the safety of each neighborhood, it became apparent that the south side of Chicago is more vulnerable to coronavirus than other parts of the city. The south side of the city currently does not have adequate access to COVID testing facilities, and some residents have said that they would have to drive over 45 minutes to get to a testing facility, which is not practical. While researching these statistics, another one that struck me as significant is that in Chicago public high schools, there is 1 social worker for every 800 students. Chicago has a tradition of resilience, from the Great Chicago Fire to being Cubs fans, and children have to have the right resources to develop that resilience. That's why this testing center will eventually become a social workspace to provide the room and resources CPS students need to address social and emotional issues. When we began this project, Illinois was moving into phase 3 of the pandemic reopening plan. Testing facilities in Chicago, like the one at the University of Chicago, were testing up to 1,200 people a day. With this many people needing to be tested, I wanted my entire building to begin as a testing facility. As Illinois moved into phase 4, my building changed to reduce the size of the testing space and add a social work area. Maintaining a partial testing facility allows the school to utilize the center to test students before they enter the building in the fall. When testing slows significantly and the world begins to return to a new normal, the entire building will transition into a social workspace only. With the idea of rapid construction in my mind, I initially used shipping containers for my design. However, the narrow spaces that were created inside the containers were not appropriate for social workspaces. The feeling of a shipping container facade also did not create the welcoming and permanent feeling that I wanted students to feel as they approached the facility. By moving to a 9 foot by 9 foot grid, it allowed for more comfortable space for both the medical professionals that will use the facility and the faculty and students that will use the social workspace. I began forming my design by choosing 2 main axes and placing a 9 foot by 9 foot grid on the axes. The next diagram to the right shows how I fit together the different aspects of the testing center program, separating the contaminated and non-contaminated zones in the building, which you can see in the 3rd diagram in the bottom left. My final building layouts allow for simple circulation for all staff members and also the clear separation of vehicular testing and pedestrian testing for pedestrian safety. As you can see in the bottom left corner of my screen, both the lab staff and the staff support and contact tracing staff members can move in a circular pattern throughout the building. And the pedestrian testing, the walk-up testing is on the top of the building, whereas the vehicular drive-up testing is on the side of the building. Everyone enters from the bottom of the building with the red arrow. As both a testing facility and a social workspace for CPS students, the building needs to be easily accessible by the community and the students of the school. I chose to place the building at Morgan Park High School in the Morgan Park neighborhood because of the lack of testing centers around the high school and the walkability of the surrounding blocks. So as you can see on this image, the closest testing facility is the hospital that's highlighted in red. That's Roseland Community Hospital, and it's 2.2 miles away from the high school, which is still extremely far for people to walk, and they would have to pass Interstate 57 to get there. Midwest Express Clinic is 2.2 miles in the other direction, which isn't any closer and is still difficult to get to. And also most of these testing facilities need prior screening or limit their testing to certain patients. Around the site, you can access different bus stops. The bus 112 gets you to the site. Also the Metro Rock Island District line and Highway I-57. So, and for vehicles that are coming from I-57 and would like to do the walk-up testing, there are several parking opportunities around the site for patients when they're using the facility. So my building sits in the Morgan Park High School parking lot. And as you can see, there are several vehicular points of access as well as pedestrian points of access that are already on the site. So the solid red line shows the walking access to the site from the school. That sidewalk can also be used when the school is not in session for people to walk up and approach the testing facility. The yellow line, the yellow solid line, shows how cars will access the site. And then the dashed lines in yellow show how cars can exit the waiting line if they don't want to wait in line any longer. The thinner blue line shows how emergency vehicles and delivery vehicles can access my building. I wanted them to have a completely separate access off of the main road so that they never really crossed over the same traffic patterns as the cars that were waiting in line, so that they had the easiest access to the site. So I placed the entrance for my building on the opposite side of the high school and also opposite the walk-in testing to hopefully try and deter people from trying to enter the building while it's a testing facility. This also is directly accessible from the staff parking lot, which is just to the left of the building. So now going into a more detailed floor plan. You enter the building by the large black arrow and move into space number 1, which is the entry and airlock. Then staff members move into space number 2, which is the restroom and changing area. And then they can either go into the staff support space and the atrium, which is like their break space and where they can eat, or they move into the pre-dawn space for the lab, which is highlighted in green. Once they're in the lab and have that extra layer of PPE on, then they can collect the testing samples from both the vehicular traffic and the pedestrian traffic on both sides of the L-shaped lab. And then there's also lots of room for sample storage, waste storage, and PPE storage. Then if they would like to leave and take a break or use the bathrooms or change, then they go through the doff space, which is labeled as number 7. So they shower and change and leave. Space number 8 is the contact trace space. So there's already offices set up here, which is really nice for when it transitions into a social workspace. This will be a great place to set up offices for the faculty. For my product, I also created a collapsible workbench and a collapsible work table for the lab. So these tables and benches can easily adapt to the plan as it changes from a testing facility to a social workspace, but also can create more space for the. So there is the pedestrian walk-up testing. Those benches can be folded against the wall so that they can get closer to the window if they have to, and they don't have to constantly lean over the benches. Also, it allows for people to close the benches if they don't need as many workstations, if the testing numbers reduce. And also if someone's not at their workstation, it can create more space. And these are easily stored also. So my building is made up of walls, CLT walls, steel columns, and corrugated roofs with wood beams. So as you can see in the section on the left, this just shows the process between the interior sample collection and the exterior walk-up testing. So both of these are considered contaminated zones, but people can walk up to the facility. They're covered by a steel roof with wood beams, and so they're shaded and protected from the rain. And then the same structure moves over into the building to continue it to make it one cohesive building. Moving into the interior, this just shows how the drive-up lab looks. So samples are collected from the window. They can be placed into the racks that are on the table. Then they can move through the process of being labeled, packaged, and then put into cold storage for pickup. The same is done here in the walk-up lab testing area. And as you can see, each lab station is separated by plexiglass dividers so that the workers can maintain 6 feet of social distancing without having to really think about it and add that extra step. In the section and elevation, we can see the difference between the contaminated zones and the non-contaminated zones within the building. So I tried to separate those as much as possible just so that it was very clear for the staff in the building. And also when the building switches to being a half testing facility and half social workspace, there's a clear distinction between where the students can go and where they cannot go. So moving from left to right, we have the drive-up testing area where workers will walk outside and walk up to the cars and test them. Then they pass the test samples through the window into the lab where they're packaged and labeled and put into cold storage for pickup. Next, we have the atrium space where staff can work outside they can work in an environment that has trees and lots of light during their break if they would like, just to make it a more welcoming and calming environment for them. Then staff support is just their break area, and then contact tracing where they call different patients. The same is shown in the elevation, and as you can see, the exterior of the building is in wood panel cladding, and that's to create a warmer feel for the building. So another aspect of my project is a water collection tank, which the atrium surrounds. So since I was so close to a high school and wanted to give back in so many ways, like the social work and connect it back to the high school, I also came up with this idea of having a water collection tank that collects the rainwater from the gutters of the building, moves it into the tank. The tank then pushes that water back into the high school water pipes and the building's water pipes, and then the recycled water gets used in both facilities. And then the image at the bottom just shows the difference between each space again. So moving from the airlock and entry into the restroom and locker room, into staff support. You can see that water collection tank in the atrium space where stuff gets labeled and packaged, and then walk-up testing with Morgan Park High School in the background. Showing the interior of that staff support and atrium space, we can see that there's lots of space for people to move around and to really make this their own. However, I only put limited seating because of the social distancing that's still in order. And I wanted the doctors to not have to think about, am I too close to someone? So they can sit by those trees in that little atrium space, or they can sit on the few chairs that are outside. Lastly, thinking about future use in the social work space, I researched where all of the CPS where the Chicago public high schools are, and decided to create this testing facility module that could be moved to each high school. So since this is an issue that affects more than just the South Side and more than just the one neighborhood in Chicago where I placed my building, I wanted a module that could be placed on any site that could then be added on to build a space that is needed for that area. So it could be a different size, it could be a different shape based on the room that's there on the site, because Morgan Park is very lucky because they have a lot of parking lots that are very large, but not all of the Chicago public high schools have that. So if they just wanted to keep it as a testing facility module that then transitions into something else afterwards, they could keep this tiny facility as it is. Or they could add on to it and create it something bigger, like what I have done at Morgan Park High School. This creates a sense of stability for a lot of children in the city that may not have a lot of stability in their lives, and also just gives them resources that they might not normally have. So thank you for listening to my presentation, and I look forward to our conversation.
Thank you, Hannah, for that presentation. At this point, I'm going to ask Rosalie to jump in and share her screen and start talking about her reaction, which is for public health and social justice.
Hi, everybody. My research is based primarily, like Dr. Bliss mentioned, on social justice and how our pandemic response can serve what's needed now, but also when you peel back the onion, able to serve the community in ways that are going to benefit in the long term as well. Okay. It's heavily research-based. I did a lot of social research that really like showed how this pandemic is like holding a magnifying lens up to social inequities that already exist. COVID-19 is impacting low-income housing communities at a higher rate than affluent communities. The same thing goes for minority communities. I really wanted to focus my efforts, since the Black community is really suffering more from COVID-19 than the white community, on trying to serve that community in Peoria specifically, which we'll get into a little bit later. But the Black community is dying at about 3 times the rate as the non-Black community, and yet getting tested at 1/3 of the rate as the white community, meaning that there's little access to testing for the Black community. And so as you can see in the graph below, it just kind of shows the discrepancy of numbers based on the total percent confirmed as opposed to the total percent confirmed in the Black community. And it's about twice the rate in the Black community. To the right, you'll see some information about how COVID-19 and social justice are colliding. There was a 30,000 strong protest for the Black Lives Matter movement in Chicago on June 6th. You can see from the images that probably about 50% of people were wearing masks, which is going to contribute to a differential spread of COVID-19 within the community. So it's important that we keep an eye on that and are able to test and protect the people who are out there fighting for social justice. In Peoria specifically, there was a 1,000 strong protest on June 7th. And I was there, so I could see that approximately 50% of people were wearing masks. So we can expect a similar rate of transmission in Peoria based on the protests themselves. So my concept really focuses around social justice and accessibility, buildability, and empowerment. Is this going to be an easy facility to build? Can it go up quickly, and yet can it be durable to serve future needs? It needs to be accessible to make sure people have access to testing. And it needs to be able to empower the local community, because the community that I've chosen for my direct service area has a relatively high social vulnerability rating, which you'll see in the following slides. I followed the program that was laid out for us, but I wanted to make sure that each space was able to be converted and used in the future for a different need to suit the community, which we'll also go over later. And below, you'll see kind of the process that we needed to follow as far as what kinds of functions and circulations are needed in our facility. This is my reaction. I kind of took precedent from Robert Venturi and Denise Scott Brown. I created a painted shed. Wanted to have a versatile space that can be adapted to suit the needs of the community, both during and after the pandemic. So what happens there again when you peel back the outer layer of the onion? What's left? Peoria, Illinois is kind of an important site selection for this particular facility. I don't know if y'all read this recent article that came out of the New York Times, but it was specifically talking about how Peoria is just having a lot of issues with the Black community. And there's a quote from it. It's a city where many Black residents, who make up about 27% of the population, and white residents experience starkly different economic realities, leading to years of frustration and despair. So even though Peoria is being lauded as one of the best post-pandemic places to live, it actually continues to be considered one of the worst places to live for Black residents. And as you can see in the bubbles of information to the right, there's an enlarged map of my service area, which focuses around 5 census tracts from which I garnered data. 47% of the people in these census tracts are under the poverty line. There's a 0.8+ social vulnerability rating, and that's between 0 and 1. 60% of the population are Black in this direct service area. It's definitely a food desert and medically underserved, which I really can't stress enough. And an average of 24% of households do not have access to a vehicle. And this is a heavy foot trafficked area. So heavy pedestrian and biking area as well. This is just kind of like a little bit of a health shed of the area. You can see the direct service area is highlighted in teal, and the site itself is a more brilliant teal. There's very little in the way of health. There is one walk-in clinic, but they are screening for specific people who need to be tested. And the testing doesn't actually happen there. They outsource it to another area. So these bubbles of information to the lower right also show that people in our direct service area suffer from a lot of health problems at almost twice the rate of the rest of Peoria. And these health problems have been shown to negatively impact the symptoms of COVID-19. The site layout, it's really convenient because the site that I chose is between two one-way streets, which really helps to direct the flow of traffic. There are some really important cultural nodes, for example, Lincoln Park Library to the left of this bird's eye map. And there's a barber shop a little further up, which I found out a little bit later in my project. And the barbershop is a really important cultural node for the Black community, especially Black men who are much less likely to seek out health care. And there's also the house of worship, which is directly to the east of our site. There's a bike lane on each of the one-way streets as well. And there's heavy pedestrian traffic. So it's a pretty good little node for access for the community. It's also located relatively close to the one major food source in the area, which is the Family Dollar. You can see below the images that show the site specifically and the house of worship. As mentioned prior, the one-way streets really make the control of traffic a lot more straightforward, and they separate the control of traffic from pedestrian foot traffic. And we have this two-way street to the east that allows for easier staff and service vehicle entry. This just kind of shows the hot and clean zones of the facility. I wanted to make sure there was plenty of space that's separated clean from dirty. And then you have the variable hot zones over which there's a little bit less control, but the red zone here shows that a more controlled hot zone that's within the facility itself. The plan is really focused around circulation and making sure that the program for staff support, which is up here to the east, has a pretty large degree of separation from the shipping and packaging lab to the west here. The entry for staff and service is on the opposite side to the entry for patients. So making sure that patient and staff are safely separated from each other so that there is less degree of spread within the facility itself. A lower degree of spread, I should say. There is also an enclosed expandable tent here that allows permeable membranes for staff to be able to test patients as they come in. And there are also permeable membranes along the lab wall that allow people who are testing, staff who are testing both drive-in and walk-in, to place those samples into an alphabetized permeable membrane there, little cubbies that allow folks within the shipping and packaging lab to access from the inside. So there's no foot traffic really between the two spaces, which can maintain an optimal level of separation from contaminated spaces. Also, it's important to mention that the shipping and waste are loaded up from within, so no one has to leave these vehicles, which further separates outsiders from possible contamination. This is just kind of a more 3D representation of the plan itself that gives a little bit better idea and feel of the space. The facility is of steel framing construction. It's a stud wall based, steel studs and wide flanges support the roof structure. It's a concrete floor with radiant heat to allow a better ease and more efficient heating throughout the facility. The don and doff area, it's kind of important to mention, are temporary partitions made of aluminum. so they can be taken down later when the building is going to have a different purpose. And this to the right just shows the areas where you've got the alphabetized in-wall slots that allow for better organization of sample collection. This is the north elevation. It just kind of shows that the north side is primarily set aside for staff entry and service entry and exit. And you also have your mobile dispatch in the center around which the building is organized. And you've got your sample collection drive-through to the right here, and your mechanical room access to the left. The south elevation really shows that it's primarily dedicated to patient circulation. And you've got your walk-in sample collection and your drive-through sample collection and the walk-in waiting. This just kind of shows the different types of procedures that are experienced by different users. You've got your staff procedure. It's important to know that at the very beginning, you have to don your PPE, and then you're able to maintain your shift throughout. And as you're done with your shift, you can doff and go to the staff support areas as a patient. It's a really simple, like you go in, you give your information, sample collection, and then exit. And the contact trace happens after the testing, of course, and just kind of follows that procedure. The north-south section perspective kind of shows that process as well, as far as spatially how the walk and bike and sample collection is able to happen through these permeable membranes. You've got your internal post-on circulation, and then that permeable membrane through which you can place your sample, and people on the interior of the lab can do the label and packaging. These are just some images that give a little bit better feel for the spaces. I wanted to make sure that there was plenty of height that separated these spaces as well. Just to make the area, make it feel not so boxed in, make it something that's going to be nice to use both for the pandemic time as well as for post-pandemic when it will have a different use. The tent that you saw on the very first image on the title slide, it is a series of Black Lives Matter banners that is my product. It's a really simple product. It's based on a breaking down of the actual fabric. So when the pandemic is over, we know that the fight for social justice will be ongoing. And this tent can be broken down into banners that can be used as signs for marches, rallies, and protests in order to promote racial justice and basic human rights, which is a really important fight right now. Future use. This, as I said earlier, is meant to be a painted shed. So you've got plenty of wall space to do exactly that. You can paint on it. You see all this lovely empty wall here. And then it can also be converted into a food bank and neighborhood garden, which is going to empower the local community, which has been suffering as a food desert for at least 2 years since the Kroger closed in the area. And even before then, the Kroger was not really within walking distance of this particular service area. So thank you, and stay healthy and stay safe. And here are my references.
Thank you, Rosalie, for your presentation. At this point, I will invite our reviewers and the three students who presented to unmute themselves and to turn on their cameras so we can have a discussion about the projects and receive comments from our reviewers. And also have a frank discussion about what these kinds of reactions might afford to pandemic response. So Professor Bross, Professor Stallmeyer.
I have a question before we start.
Yes.
Who are we assuming are funding these projects?
That's a great question. Some students have found that these are more part of the Army Corps or National Guard situations, so this be deployed by the government. Other students are assuming they are community funded or local government funded. Others are thinking about federal funding. So there was not a clear, I didn't give them a funding source. This was sort of thinking broadly about what architecture's response might be. So this morning's group was really about temporary construction. And this afternoon, we're moving into more permanent facilities that would necessitate further funding than maybe what we saw this morning even.
Okay.
So Yadi, if you want to join as well.
Where's Yadi?
She's
Where's
hiding.
Rosalie?
I'm still here. My internet is a little bit unstable today, so that's why I turned off the camera.
Okay, and
Thank you.
Rosalie, you're here.
I'm here. I don't really have a good place in the house for a nice white wall.
Okay, no, I get that.
So I'll open it up to comments from the reviewers just about the projects, and then we can move into a more general discussion thereafter.
So I have some, well, maybe I'll flip that around and say I have some common themes that I saw in all three of the projects.
Please.
One of those I think is a real challenge, which is how do you put a building in the middle of a parking lot and make it something that people want to go to, or that has some, humane nature to it? And I think that that's a real challenge. And I think it's something that all three of you guys need to maybe revisit a little bit, because they do look like they're just kind of, and I wish maybe you guys have seen the ones this morning that look temporary, but they don't have a good sense of site. Now, what I mean by that is I think that they're well cited within their urban context. I think that the research that you did and where in the city you put them is very good. But I think when it comes to the human scale of the site, all three of the projects need more work, okay? They look like they're just sort of, and this is gonna sound kind of maybe a little overly harsh, but they look a little bit sort of plopped in there, right? There's nothing beyond that boundary where the wall and the parking lot meet each other, right? And we know, given that these are more permanent solutions, that there's foundation. This parking lot is going to be totally gone by the time they're going to have to dig a big hole and put a building there and start over again with this parking lot. It's not something we're going to bring on a truck and put in a parking lot and then take away. So I really think that that's something that I'm sure you've struggled with. And I would say that that's something that still needs more work.
I think I'll take some responsibility for that, because the intention of this project initially was temporary. My whole goal was temporary, that we were way out ahead of COVID. And then it was mostly going to be gone by the end of the studio. And as you can tell, we're not there. And these students have sort of started to figure out that. So I think, yeah, that's something we absolutely have to start to look at.
And I think that Yadi's has a certain so look at the section and look at how the building sits on the ground.
Right.
Technically, construction wise, how does this work? Right. And Yadi's kind of looks like it's sitting on a parking lot. Mm-hmm. But then we got to Rosalie and she said it has a concrete floor. So it's not sitting on a parking lot. People are not standing on the parking lot, right? It's like a raised, I don't know what it is, right? So I just wrote construction here because, and this is kind of my second point, which is, I heard about a steel roof with wood beams. I heard about wood panel cladding. I heard about steel studs with wide flange beams. To me, you guys need to think about how a building really goes together. This is a really small object, and you need to get your hands dirty with some of the tectonics. What is this thing really made of? What is the structural system? Rosalie, I saw a steel structure in your renderings. I saw steel columns and steel beams. And I don't know if that's required for a building of this scale. It's really small. It could be stick built. It could be steel studs that are, with LVLs or with wooden engineered beams at the top, as the roof structure. So construction. Hannah, you said steel roof. What does that mean? And your renderings show like this corrugated metal, but that doesn't keep the rain out. And so then when we go inside the building, we see this beautiful, you know, interior, but it doesn't have a roof, right? So I would just say you need to look at the construction, the details. All three of you guys need to look at how do buildings really get put together. My last comment is we saw two out of the three based on a grid, and I think, you know, there's a whole, or a module. There's a whole discussion about the use of a module and what it does for you and what it doesn't do for you, right? So it does some really important things. It creates a framework, but it also ties your hands, because if you're on a 5-foot grid and you want to make something that's 7 feet, you're not on the grid anymore. And so the grid is double-edged. You know, once you say I'm on a 9-foot grid or I'm on a 6-foot grid, you're stuck with it. So I'll leave it there. And then I have some other comments about presentation, which I think is a whole nother kind of discussion about how do you present in this context, that I think is worth talking about a little bit.
Excellent. I will, if I have a few comments. I rarely take notes, but since it's this format, it allows for it. So the first thing is, I know it sounds like a platitude and a typical thing to say before reviewing, but I gotta give you guys credit. I applaud your projects. I think that they are really great examples of trying to solve something in a very short amount of time. And please don't take it as just some sort of feel-good comment. I'm impressed. I applaud you guys. I really think you did a great job in a lot of things in a very short-term amount of time. Credit to the teacher, of course, the instructor, but certainly credit to you guys. And I'm impressed. Now, if you will allow me to be a little bit critical, constructively, about your projects. Let me start with Yadi. First, your graphics are crisp and clear, a great use of axonometric to explain circulations. Really enjoyed that. The biggest challenge that all of you have is that, and Dr. Bliss kind of moved into that realm, was the fact that you are all doing responses to a temporary condition with a building that is supposed to have a life beyond the temporary condition. And that makes it a very complex thing. And the reason why is because, why this makes it so complex for me is because I keep thinking about what my baseline is. Where am I comparing this to? And unfortunately, I compare it to Sunday's COVID test that I took. Negative, by the way, don't worry. It was just, I just wanted to do it. And it was literally a military tent with 6 soldiers, Air Force, in 2 plastic tables. They literally, with gloves, everybody with their face coverings, gave me the stuff. I did it, you know, and I put it in their gloved hands, and that was it. And there was one mobile trailer off to the side, and I imagined that once they collect all the samples, it goes and gets shipped to someplace in Illinois, and then I got a call the next day, that fast. So I compared that temporariness, that ephemerality, that to your projects. And then I thought to myself, wow, what a difficult situation you're in, because you're trying to do both things. And one of the things that I noticed was, you know, Professor Stallmeyer hinted at it, or actually was quite explicit, I should say, which is the issue of the modularity. 2 of you were much more modular. And as he said, it's a double-edged sword. But the problem is that, for example, at Yadi, I saw every single possible dimension you could possibly imagine in your drawings. 5'7", 6'3", 12 foot. I mean, I'm making them up, but nothing was modular. So you have to strike a happy medium where perhaps most things are modular and there are few interactions that aren't because they're specific to the site. So this is sort of like in the way that in many things, you get a standard kit, but then you can modify it for specificity. the inverse is true for Hannah and Rosalie. I did see in Hannah's project a little more of that. I saw modularity, and then, you know, it struck me in Hannah's project that I thought I was looking at, you know, at a Corbusian plan, particularly of Villa Savoy. I mean, it literally looked like the plan at first. And there's, you know, we can discuss whether that's good or bad. I just thought it was a very clear column grid and then a curved element, et cetera. And in Rosalie's project, the modularity was a little clearer, and it was sort of, can we do a kit of parts where we can do sort of intermediate spaces, like the mobile lab that kind of plugged into the middle, and but you know, it could be done differently. And so I appreciate that struggle. In that sense, that's why I'm a little more critical of Yadi's, in the sense that I think it would benefit from more modularity with some specific components which are ad hoc to the site. In Yadi's project, I would have to clinically, now I'm not a medical doctor, I just play one on TV, and we have somebody who does that here on the jury. I think that there's a lot of, and this actually goes for all three of you. In my past life, I got to design a few hospitals, and it is incredibly complex. If you're really going to do hazmat, decontamination, Sally port, the infrastructure around that is really, it's complex. Air extraction systems, air change volume controls can get really complex, particularly if you're doing that. And in Yadi's case, for example, there was no actual Sally port that I could tell, no real exclusion zones as you move through. The other two projects did have them, but they're, to me, you're in a really difficult situation because the permanence of your building as a lab doesn't really suggest the kind of intricacies that really go into the air conditioning and air ventilation systems that occur if you're going to be that strict about it. Your slab heights or your roof heights, the air systems, the extractors, the ventilation systems get really complex very quickly. So this is why I keep going back to that baseline. The National Guard in the Market Square really just let natural air carry off the potential pathogens, right? They're wearing the face mask, they're in an open side, and breeze comes through, and that's how they handle it. I think that that's one of the complications of making it from a temporary to a permanent structure. Does this make sense to you guys, what I'm saying?
Definitely.
Okay, and I'm not being critical in the sense that you should know this, because why would you, unless you've already had to work with, in my case, MD Anderson in Houston was one of the people that I worked with. The cancer ward, they had a particular separation unit because of people who had lung cancer. Anyway, I have to applaud Hannah's real jab to the heart about resilience and Cub fans. I caught that. I'm not a Cubs fan, but that was funny. And you said it so straight. It was just deadpan. I found your plan particularly weirdly intriguing, the fact that you leave the bathroom stalls right off of the entrance with no separation to them. In other words, you walk out. On one hand, I'm thinking Hannah has embraced her European self, and be damned any separations. And if you walk out of that bathroom stall and it opens and your pants are still down, amen. So be it. I don't know if you're that conscious about it. So just look at that plan, because I remember as you walk in, I noticed those toilet stalls, those doors open. That's it. You're there. You're in the public realm. And maybe that's okay. Like I said, I have been to restrooms throughout Europe that are exactly that way. And maybe that's you're embracing that. If not, just, you know, maybe some sort of separation. And this that brings me to another point, which is the tension that you've created for all three of you between temporality and permanence. Space is a premium. And I see a lot, I know that there's social distancing that you're using as a kind of analysis of how the relationships are, the ergonomic relationships. But on the other hand, I saw a lot of open space that feels to me, like architecturally important, not necessarily functionally important. Because as you pointed out, I made the roof a little taller to feel a little less compressed. I made this room a little bit wider because the architects in you want to do gracious, wonderful spaces. And that's where I started to think, well, who's funding this? Because ultimately, if the building is going to be something else in the second life, then all these architectural moves that give grace and usability in the long term are very much merited. If they really are funded through the CDC's immediate reaction program or something like that, I would be the first on a panel to say every 20% additional is 20% less of another site that I could put into another testing site. Does that make sense? And so you have to balance those things. And I understand so much how complex this issue is in that sense. I have to tell Hannah that I enjoyed her roof forms. For me, those roof forms are always very evocative. Now, moving to Rosalie's project. First of all, I salute the passion, the passus in which you have engaged the generative issues, or it's where it comes from. And I think that absolutely that healthcare, taking care of people, taking care of the Black community particularly, is an incredibly powerful motivator. And I applaud that you've taken that and you've harnessed it and said, let's be constructive. There are, however, as an epidemiologist, there are certain questions that I would have to ask you. You made certain assertions that I'm not saying they're wrong, but I would have to ask you in a more in-depth thing, which is, for example, you talked about, let me take a step back. I did my undergraduate in the Bay Area many, many moons ago. And my primary care physician at the time, Dr. Kevis, was a men's health specialist. And he was telling me back in the early 90s when the AIDS epidemic was just starting to come down, that what had finally worked was information. It was about education, that the gay community in San Francisco was very afraid of testing, that it wasn't that there was a lack of testing facilities, it was the fact that they had, through the 80s, had to work very hard to get the gay community to commit to going in and being regularly tested. And so that lesson to me makes me want to ask you, and it doesn't mean that you didn't do it, is the issue a lack of testing facilities or distrust of the testing facilities? So you need to address that at some point in some way in your narrative.
Okay.
Does that make sense? I'm not saying that it isn't.
No, it makes sense.
It's just, are we, because particularly minority communities tend to be, and rightfully so, very, very, very cautious about state, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where's this information? Who's getting it? Is it going to be used against me later on? Or is it the fact, because I cheated while you were still discussing, I did Peoria testing facilities and I counted 3. And then I compared them to your graph and I noticed that where you picked was one of the places that's centric, one of the testing centers, the OSF testing facility sort of centric to that area. So it makes me wonder, is it a lack of testing or a lack of willingness of the Black community to come and be tested? And that's why I talked about Dr. Kevis and his explanation to me. Nonetheless, the design itself, I agree with Dr. Stallmeyer, the tectonics, but again, I think it's a function of the speed and the density of the attack that you have. You don't have that much time to work these things out. And yet I think that you've already started to engage in them. And finally, one of the secondary reasons why I asked who's funding this is your description of taking down the canvas and then making Black Lives Matter. I have to tell you, if it's publicly funded, I would never embrace somebody in some town taking them down and then saying, I'm not endorsing this, please. White Lives Matter. I can't endorse that either. It's like, you don't want state to be part of any, you want individuals to rise up, but I can't imagine that we as a state would do that, because today we embrace BLM, but tomorrow we might not. State has to take a neutral position and give its services without allowing it to be, you can't preconceive, oh, and after this is done, by the way, we're going to cut this and make these, as much as I may like the idea, I just caution you, because that's part of the neutrality of the state that has to take, as much as I like the idea. Okay, I hope I made myself understood that I'm not denying the importance of these things. Anyway, so that's me. Sorry, it was a long spiel, but I did, unlike usual, actually write a lot of notes. So.
Well, luckily for me, I can be third, although I think Dr. Stallmeyer still has some stuff to say. Can you see me okay? Yeah, okay. So just some general comments and then I'll do specifics. Think about when you make those restrooms, and just following up on his comments. In general, most people, I think, of new healthcare facilities I've been in, and some old ones who've changed signage, be careful to the men, women thing, maybe make them unisex and more inclusive. Maybe really look at your space that maybe they have a separate toilet room or a changing toilet room, and then lockers can be all together. Kind of think of, and so I've seen some today where it's really good design where you can come in and go out and there's separate spaces for people. As far as spaces, the comments about spaces are important. You don't want to be too close in if you're working, because that makes, it contributes to staff fatigue. And you want to have enough space for people to move around, keep some of that 6-foot social distancing, but you also want it to be functional. And I know Yadi had trees and plants in our atrium. Please remember, in a medical space, you cannot sterilize a tree or a plant. And I'll just tell you one brief little story. I had a nurse who went to the Caribbean or somewhere, and she brought me back a banana plant, and I thought it was so pretty, and I had it on my office, which was really close to the patient care area, and little gnats started coming out. I'd throw it away. We put it outside, and it actually did better outside, but just think about not having plants in a space that's supposed to be a medical area. As far as ventilation, this was probably my fault from the very beginning, because I said, this is not going to be a lab where you're performing tests. You are just packaging and shipping. So remember that ventilation, probably efficient HVAC would be good enough for what the level, because they're not actually going to be performing at this point in time. There are no tests available that can be performed in the facility where the testing, where the actual swabs are gotten. So some specifics, Yadi, I love your green pods. I think instead of a permanent structure, you need to think about how you can pick those up and move those places. I think it's very attractive. I think small communities would love to have that come in and sit down in their Walmart parking lot. I think they're very conducive to people enjoying that area. I was especially interested in the solar panels and being sustainable. Boy, if you could harness that, maybe you could talk to Elon Musk about really making that have enough energy to be sustainable, to filter your water, to do what you need to do. If you needed to put that down in the middle of some place and really utilize that. I know you kind of wanted it more permanent, but I could really see it being movable. As far as Hannah, I took that word resilience and went with that. I was thinking about how architecture and homes are now. Everybody wants open, open, open. But in the past, they all wanted small rooms. You wanted a small, cozy dining room, or not maybe small, but a specified dining room, a specified this, a specified that. Now everything's open. With yours, you can make it into rooms that can open, but just think about if you did use this next to a high school for social work or social community space for the teenagers. If you had to, you could go back to those small rooms and use those again for lab or vaccination or healthcare, and maybe plug into that high school for some of that infrastructure, but I'm not an engineer, so I don't know how to do that. I think you did have a vision for the future there. That could also be for a vision for the future beyond the future, like going back to what you originally thought it was going to be. And Rosalie, wow, you could, the way that your walls are movable, how you have your flow of people moving through. I think you really could sell this for people who need a site to go up quickly. Maybe there's a tornado and the medical facility is blown down. You could take this and put it somewhere and really make it adaptable for people. I agree with the previous commentator. You need to be careful about your signage and your purposes, because you don't want to intensify inequity. You wanted to bring people together, and you're passionate about that. And I think you can figure out a way to make that all inclusive and really bring it to communities who need it. What a good way to be able to move the space around and make it adaptable to a community. And I know this is all supposed to be about COVID, but I think each of you thought about something for the future that would be good for everybody. You all kind of picked a different use. I'm always thinking, oh, we need to bring more healthcare, we need to bring vaccination clinics, we need to be dental clinics, we need to bring well child care. But I think that's the point of having different people in the class, because you bring different ideas. So I don't know anything about architecture, but I know I like what you guys did.
Thank you for your comments. Professor Stallmeyer, if you want to, you can either jump back in and we can talk about presentation, or my other question was really about how, for the students and maybe for all of us to think about how designing for another cause, permanent or temporary, either affords more solutions or less solutions for creating human-centric design. I don't know if, you saw some of the designs this morning, and I think maybe one of the things that these ladies took on a little bit differently was this idea of human causes. So either we can start with the presentation stuff, but I was also thinking about the idea of human-centric design.
Yeah, no, we can definitely talk about that larger issue. I don't want to get too much into the weeds on like how the buildings get put together.
Right.
In
4.5 weeks.
Yeah, I do think we're in a moment where we want to ask the bigger questions, both for you guys, but also as architects going out into the world at this point. I'm always trying to ask why are we making this piece of architecture, right? So one of the bigger questions, and this goes to resilience and it goes to future use, so it's a big question, is what happens when we don't need it anymore, right? And when Rosalie invoked the decorated shed, and I was thinking about these buildings being placed in the parking lot at the mall, right? That's all the buildings in the parking lot at the mall, right? This week it's a steakhouse, and next week it's a pizza parlor, and then the week after that it's a COVID-19 testing site, and then the week after that it's a liquor store, and then it's a video store, and then it's a who knows what. But my question is, what happens to it when we're done with it? Because I don't think that we're in a position as architects at this point in time to be thinking about architecture as disposable. That's my personal opinion. So what happens to it? It's an interesting intersection, because all these materials that we're using inside the building, they are disposable, right? We use these gloves, it's one time, we throw it away. But architecture, I think, is not disposable or shouldn't be disposable. And so the question is, how do you decommission this building? How do you take it apart? How do you reuse it in a way that is meaningful and that it's not just put in a landfill? Okay. And so, again, that's a question that's not specific to any one project. I think it's a question that each of you as designers need to think about. So I'll leave that. And that goes to resilience. It goes to adaptability. It goes to, is this a 3-year building, or is this a 20-year building, or is this a 50-year building? It's probably not a 50-year building, because we don't build 50-year buildings anymore, because the economics of construction doesn't allow us to build 50-year buildings unless it's a, federal courthouse or a jail or a, I don't know what, but, so that's just something that you as architects, I think, are going to be setting the agenda on. What does it mean to build this building for the long term, even if the use is something other? Okay. So 2 things that I want to hit on presentation, which is, it's difficult sometimes to follow from this end, right? You guys need to remember that your audience, your client, whoever, they haven't seen this, and I'm pretty familiar with what the projects are supposed to look like. So I want each of you to go back to your diagrams and like pass it to your neighbor and say, can you figure this out? Because there were some diagrams here that I couldn't figure out. And part of it is just clarity. Use of color, for example. I wrote, so at one point, and I don't want to single people out, but I'm going to single people out, right? So Hannah, you need to look at your colors, your color scheme, because when I looked at it on my screen, it was all the same. And you said the blue arrow, and I was like, crap, where's the blue arrow? And I was just looking for the blue arrow, right? And you were already on to something else, right? Whereas if it had been a red arrow, I would have been like, there's a red arrow. Your palette was all the same. It was all in the same, they were all grays and blues, and I couldn't differentiate, right? And in a couple of places, there's just a lot going on. So Rosalie, in your drawings, you had arrows and you had dimensions and you had furniture and you had architecture and you had diagrams, and it was all squashed on top of each other. And I couldn't figure out where the people were coming in, where they were going out, where they were donning and where they were doffing and where they were thising and that, and it was like, I just wanted a clear flow chart that said in here, out there. Very simple. Okay. I think that's really important, especially in a project like this, where people who are running it really want to know if they're going to be safe, right? Can I separate the public from the people who are doing the swabs, right? And so I wanted you to just go back and really look for clarity. This is going to sound like nitpicking, but before you put these in your portfolio, I want everybody to spell check. Okay. I saw patient misspelled. I saw packaging misspelled. I saw a couple of other misspellings that are just, happened this morning before you made your PDF, I think probably at the last second. Okay. So just be careful, because it's really easy to do. All right. And they really come off the screen at you when you see these PDFs for some reason. They just jump. I'm like, oh my God, there's patient spelled wrong, And so anyway, that's a small thing. But when you show this to your employer, they want to know that you're not going to have those on your drawings. So that's important. What else? Oh, anybody who's looking at a module, one of my favorite modular buildings is the Gandhi Ashram building by Charles Correa in Ahmedabad. And if you want to look at an example of just somebody who said, this is a module and I'm going to live with it and it's all going to work, look at that. Look at the site. Look at the way it's duplicated. Look at the kind of space it creates. It's outdoor space, which is also kind of applicable here. So let's see, what else? Two specific things that I think I would like you to look at in terms of architecture. Yadi, I think you should look at your staff entry and where it's located and flip it to the other side of the building so that it isn't so crushed in with everything else. It seems like if it was on the back side of the building where the little porch was, instead of on the front side, what I consider the front, it would probably be better. And I know that is going to cause some circulation problems for you, but I also think, based on my recollection of it, that it might actually work. And also staff entry for you, Hannah, is a little undercooked. It's not very generous. It's like if I open that door all the way up, it like goes off the arc of that little curve that you've created. So be a little more generous with it, right? And then this is another presentation thing. You don't want to ever say that you've hopefully done something. You don't want to tell your client, I did this and hopefully it works. That's you're done at that point, right? You want to really say, I did this and this is why I did it. And so be careful using those words. That's a word I heard during this presentation. I appreciate the off the grid aspects, the water collection seems a little bit, and I don't want this to come off wrong because I don't know who's listening, right? We're on YouTube. But it seems the water collection sometimes seems a little gratuitous in a way, like, oh, and I can collect water off the roof here. But it's not really, the solar I totally get, because that makes it stand alone and be able to move around and, you know, be kind of off the grid. I'm not as convinced with the water collection in this instance. Okay. Yeah, that's, do you guys have questions for us?
Yeah, it's an excellent point. Any questions
You
for
want
us?
us to talk about something, or is there something that, you know, you're like, oh, I know this didn't work and they didn't tell me how to fix it, or, you know, have any advice for me?
I have like one question. This has been happened for the mid review actually. So based on the grid system I developed, I had the issue with the square footage during mid review. So one of the comments from the reviewer was that since I don't have the actual testing going on in the lab, it's simply just the packing and labeling. I might have too much square foot going on for the lab, and instead the office might be a little bit too small. So that's like one of the challenging I've been facing throughout the whole time. Just how do I work around with the grid? Do I just get rid of the grid system and then just kind of calculate based on my need, or any other way I can just still use the grid system? So that's like, yeah.
Right. So Yadi, let me ask you, why did you use a grid?
I use the grid based on the comfortable distance between two persons. So the 5 feet, that's where it comes from. And
Okay.
then coming to the interior experience. So staff, when they are protected, doesn't mean, it probably doesn't necessary to be social distance, the 6 feet. And then, so that's where I ended up not caring so much about the grid. That
Right.
has a problem.
Right. So my response to you is going to be kind of the non-response in a way, right? But it's not. It's going to be, that's why I asked you why the grid, right? Why did you pick a grid? Why did you pick 5 feet and not 6 feet? You just referenced both 5 and 6, right? And then you said, I don't really need the grid inside because everybody isn't going to worry about it. So if you're going to use a grid, you got to be all in with the grid. You can't give up on it halfway through and say, well, I'm going to use it here, but not there. Right. That's why you should look at the Charles Correa example, right? Because it wasn't like, well, this space doesn't need to be this big, so I'll just ditch the grid at this point. Right. It's, you gotta be all in on it. I don't know. Professor Bross, you want to jump in here?
Well, my approach would be that, you know, 80% of your budget goes into the things that need 80% of the budget. That's what I was trying to say. And that's what the challenge of the temporality becoming permanence is, that the grid will get you very far along. And then there might be specific things that you need to not be modular to adjust to a specific condition, because it's on a corner, because it's next to a school, whatever it is. But rather, it's not that you don't do the module, it's that it's in addition to the module. In other words,
Right.
The Gandhi Project Ashram that you mentioned by Charles Correa is a great example, because the module is very clear. Now, there might be a specific moment, not where the module has been abandoned, but where there is, by organicness, by growth, by specificity, something's added to it to adjust to the reality of the site, but not abandoned. And so that's the thing that I wanted to point out, is that if you have a module, a lot of times what's become very popular in the last 15 years is containers, right? Shipping containers. And they get dropped in, and then you just adjust them as needed. I was in a project in Tucson, Arizona, a retail project where they use shipping containers, and it's very clear that they're shipping containers. And where they needed to modify the module, they did so very specifically at that point, but not overall. And that's why, for example, that's why I was looking at Hannah's project, where she has got that sensuous curve going through. And I kind of scratched my head, because if I had to spend extra money on something non-modular, it wouldn't have been that moment. It would have been something else, because that's the robustness of the module.
But this also goes to my initial comment, or one of my initial comments, which is about constructability and tectonics, because the module actually allows you to say, you know, I've got this 5x5 thing and I can work it out with great detail. And then I just duplicate it over and over again in a factory, and it's very efficient. It saves tons of money, right? Because we just make it over and over again. We really work that problem.
Well, you're going right back to the logic of capital. In the United States in particular, it's amazing how everything has been literally designed to fit as a system. Your ceiling tile is exactly the dimension it needs to be, so that your walls are a specific dimension, the furniture is a certain height, and it all has to do with the modularity that starts on basically, I think it's, I don't know, as I recall, it's 18 inches on center. Everything is just, you know, from purlins to joists to walls to lightened fixtures, everything is already modulated. And it's one of the reasons why architecture has an uphill struggle, because if you bespoke it, if you make it custom, then you are paying an additional premium to get something made specifically that's different. And so you have to learn to pick your battles as an architect going forward and saying, you know, I can live with the modularity of certain components because I'm going to get a bang for my buck here. This is the moment. This is not the modular moment, because I admit to myself the bathroom stalls are going to be at a specific off-the-shelf suites catalog, which I think nobody even uses anymore, God forbid. You know, I don't think, are you guys familiar with the suites catalog, Rosalie, Hannah? It used to be the resource. You had to go to the suites catalog and you had to pick, you know, from the, God almighty, that aged me. Anyway, that's so everything is already in a modulation. And that's the beauty of that. The ironic thing about that, as you guys knew from the course, was that this was the dream. That was the dream of Gropius and the whole group, that you could standardize and you could literally build entire housing developments where everybody got a fair share of in exactly the same thing. So we're living sort of the results of those things. So
at this point, I'm going to ask just any final thoughts, final quick comments, and then we will move on to our next group. Ladies, I appreciate the work that you've done. I think you all have beautiful projects, and obviously we have some things that we can work on, but for 4.5 weeks, these have come so far, and I'm thrilled with the way that you started to think about these things and also to be activists with respect to the studio. So I appreciate what you've done. Thank you very much. And these are comments that we can take and use as we finish up our last few days of class.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will say one thing. I had started out with shipping containers, but then was talked out of it at midterms because of the having to alter them and the cost of that versus just a new construction. And it seemed like it would go up more quickly if it was just 16 on center new construction dimensions.
Looking at maybe looking at those as panel systems, I think that's one thing that maybe we didn't spend enough time talking about or working through for this project. The original Dr. Bliss, any final thoughts?
I would work in any of those facilities and I could see any of them going up anywhere, even though they were site specific. Just the space given in the lab, the space given to the staff, I think was so important. And you really thought about you thought about all three of your consumers, the people who are going to fund it, the people who are going to rely on it for their healthcare. I thought you did a good job. Lots of thought went into it.
Thank you.
Well, thank you all again for your comments. We will be moving into the next presentation, which kicks off with Andy Sabin and Projector Garpur, or effectively known as Boston AP. So while those ladies are getting their presentation set up, we've had a request to have a brief break. So we're going to have a little break here. So feel free to take that break if you need to, and we will get started here in a couple minutes. Thanks.
3 minutes?
Yeah.
Should I begin the screen share, Dr. Bliss?
Yes, please do. And that way we have something beautiful to look at while we are waiting. Project and Andy, whenever you are ready, we can begin.
Okay, I'm ready. Hi, I'm Andy.
Hi, I'm Projector. We are the first project in the permanent series. Along with our peers in this group, we desire to reimagine the future use of the reaction centers and their site for the communities that we have chosen. Thinking beyond the immediate need for rapid COVID testing and treatment, in this project, we have also explored how to make public spaces safe and friendly in the time of pandemics. Our reaction is designed with adaptations to enable future use for vaccine distribution and capacity to transform it into a lasting public space. For our site selection, we studied the COVID-19 pandemic situation in and around the Boston area in Mass. The highest county of positive cases in Mass are in Suffolk and Middlesex counties. Chelsea, which is in Suffolk County, is the highest town with positive COVID cases in Mass. This is due to their extreme density, which is around 40,000 in just 2 square miles. The rapid spread of the infection is due to the housing situations in Chelsea, which are typically either multi-generational or consist of multiple roommates all under one roof. The Mass General Hospital in Chelsea is providing COVID testing. Due to this, the hospital is overstressed with the increased influx due to testing and inpatient admissions. According to Boston Globe, a local newspaper in the Boston area, medical centers are seeing visits for serious conditions like cancer, heart attacks, and strokes drop by as much as 65%. People are scared of being exposed to the coronavirus. Hence, the proposal envisions to directly partner with Mass General to test, treat, and supply vaccinations. We thought it made most sense for our testing center to be in close proximity to Mass General Hospital. The site we chose is a market basket plot adjacent to Mass General.
Boston area towns with high social vulnerability have been hit the worst by this pandemic. User groups and those in the most need in the Boston area are those who are considered to be socially vulnerable. This is in terms of energy, food, medical, or financial insecurities. Also, at a major Boston medical center, 82% of COVID patients are Hispanic or Black. This reflects the pandemic's disproportionate toll on the minority communities. In Chelsea, where 65% of residents are Latinx, infection rates are the highest in all of Massachusetts. The site is well connected by the bus, rail, and highway, and as we noted on an adjacent plot to Mass General Hospital Chelsea branch. The site is zoned as a shopping center district and is surrounded by industrial and business districts. To the east are the dense residential neighborhoods of Chelsea. Our reaction will coexist with the existing Chelsea shopping center. Because of this, we researched crowd control to better design a testing center in a multi-use site that requires social distancing. As healthcare systems emerge from this crisis and transition from reactive efforts to proactive measures, redesigning the patient journey should be the key focus. Telehealth is on the rise to protect both patient and provider. The waiting experience is made less stressful and more distanced, and healthcare is learning to become more mobile and modular to serve areas most in need and to quickly respond to health crises. Restaurants and other businesses that are wanting to reopen in low capacity are getting creative in how they distance their patrons. By utilizing vegetation as a barrier to support social distancing, we are also benefiting from the positive effects that natural greenery has on people, such as reducing stress levels. We need to install barriers between the multitude of players on our site, between cars and cars, cars and people, people and people, and reaction traffic and the general shopping traffic. It's important to keep vehicular and pedestrian movements separated. Wayfinding and crowd control are more crucial than ever at this multi-use site in Chelsea. We must maintain safety, security, and privacy at all times. By using plants as barriers, we will also foster a low stress environment that promotes health and well-being.
For approaching our site, we considered that people will come by personal vehicle, bus, or on foot. The current data available and our estimated calculations project that we expect 16 vehicles and 3 pedestrians per hour. The vehicle approach route is adjacent to the site to give a prior view of the testing process before entering the parking lot. Then, the vehicles enter a lineup and are queued to the drive lane where testing occurs, allowing them to leave the site on the same street they entered from. For people coming from bus stops, then walking to the site, covered walkways will lead them to the pedestrian waiting garden and lineup. We thought that a phased response is the most appropriate approach when dealing with a public health crisis that requires immediate attention, while also having the potential to greatly impact the future. In phase 1, we are focusing on bifurcation of circulation flows on our site to organize people and simultaneously contain the spread of COVID-19. In phase 2, we are addressing the prolonged existence of COVID and how we as designers should ensure access to pleasant public outdoor spaces that can still be enjoyed even amidst a pandemic. In phase 3, our reaction looks forward to the uncertain future where expansion and change of function are bound to happen. The grid design allows us to quickly respond to the site's needs. While we were trying to understand what could be the best way to bifurcate our circulation flows, we realized that in games, we willingly follow rules that don't appear constraining, but in fact, we enjoy following them. So, taking this forward, we decided to look at games like Battleship, Shoots and Ladders, and Pac-Man for inspiration for our site design to minimize overlap of circulation on the multi-use shopping center site. Implementing an overarching grid for social distancing acts as a labyrinth for crowd control and identifies the principal axes that aid in wayfinding. This is achieved by using plants as wayfinders and barriers to establish visual transparency, encouraging continuity, and avoiding spaces that lead to claustrophobia. For our site, we divided the program into 4 quadrants to effectively isolate the different functions of this multi-use site. The division created allows healthcare and green spaces to be accessible in any pandemic, vaccine distribution, or typical seasonal flu. We accomplished this by overlaying a 12 feet by 12 feet grid system throughout the site, which acts as a guidance for social distancing, both physically as well as psychologically. The grid size takes into consideration not only the distance required for social distancing, which is 6 feet, but also the fact that people will come with families or in a group of 2 or 3. The grid allows people to control their movement through the design cues on the site and empowers them to move as per their will. The permanent installation of inbuilt design cues that provide guidance for social distancing will continue to echo on this site for public use in the post-pandemic future.
Our reaction is located off of an existing drive lane that is surrounded by 3 currently unused lots. The building that we designed offers testing to drive up or walk up patients. Our patients at this site never enter the building, so we ensured pleasant covered areas for testing that will benefit and protect the patients and also the hardworking staff. Our floor plan circulation is divided into 3 components. The outside staff, or the sample collectors, are in the hot zone. The lab staff, where the handling, packaging, and shipping of the samples are in the semi-hot zone. The office staff, where the administrative and contact tracing staff are located, are in the clean zone. Our principal aim is to distance the 3 components to help prevent the spread of the virus. Each component has a designated zone and rest area that does not overlap with the workflow of the other components. Post-COVID, these gaps in the plan, like the rest areas and the courtyard, can be filled in or adjusted as needed. But for now, they improve the human environment and aid in. This section cuts through each zone and staff function. The division of the building's functions ensure minimum exposure for the healthcare workers that are inside the building. To ensure this, each zone has a separate working and resting environment. Here, you can see the all year and all weather covered drive lane for testing, and also the setback exterior rest area for the testing staff that are in the hot zone or outside. Also, to the sides of the building, you can see our plant barriers that divide the testing lane from the rest of the reaction parking lot. This interior view is in the semi-hot zone where the samples are packaged, labeled, and shipped. A simple, compact form that allowed for flexible expansion. The use of the ribbon windows or views out to the courtyard allow for daylighting and quality of life benefits to our staff. In this view, we are in the clean zone, the contact tracing office that is separated from all other testing areas.
We chose panel system for our temporary construction. This type of construction allows for the efficiency, modularity, and flexibility required for COVID-19 testing and proposed future use. It is also a familiar method, so it can be constructed easily without a workforce trained specifically for this type of construction. The kit of parts are modular and hence allow scope for flexibility. The embedded GIF walks us through the different stages of temporary construction in our structure. Future use. We want to begin changing the typology of the suburban parking lot into something public, pedestrian, and pleasant. By focusing on vegetation to enhance the human experience, we let our reaction center push for more of an urban impact while also maintaining the efficiency needed for emergency COVID-19 response. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you both for a lovely presentation. At this point, I'm going to ask Enzi Zhao to present her presentation for COVID testing center at the airport in Shanghai. Enzi, if you'll share your screen and begin your presentation.
Yeah. Hello everyone. My name is Yadi Z. I'm so glad to do my final review today for you. My project focuses on the people who fly from the abroad countries, starting from the interview with one of my schoolmates, the procedure, to like come back China or arrive China, always takes almost 1 month to let people go to their destination. When they got a ticket, they first need a continuous 14-day health report for boarding. And according to the Delta report recently, 40% to 60% seats in the flight were shut down to limit the passenger volume for safe distance, and after people landing, people were separated to groups according to their seat positions, and they need to have the body temperature measurement, and then according to like distributed by case. And some go to the hospital and some go to the isolated hotel or dorms. And for people who stay at the hotel, they still need to another like 14-day quarantine and have the test every day to ensure that their health and and once the result is positive, they need to go to the hospital, need to be sent to the hospital. So my project focuses on the future situations when the situation is getting better, and when tourists once the tourists got landing, they can have an immediate test and got the result, and then go to the destination. So my site is just in the one of the terminals in Hongqiao Airport. This airport is the smaller airport in Shanghai, in my city. And as you can see, like the airport is on people need to take like 8 miles from the airport to the downtown of the city. And about these two terminals, for the old terminal one, only domestic airlines use that one, and the terminal 2 is for all the international airplane. And due to the COVID-19, the passenger volume decreased to 20%, even less of the normal time. And according to the recent data from cnwgcg.com, the passenger volume of the Chinese Labor Day is only like 27,000 in total, and also knowing this passenger volume in total is for domestic and the international both, and based on the passenger volume during the national holidays, almost 6 times of the usual working days, and also the working hours. I got the result that the capacity for the present passenger volume of this testing center is approximate 6 at the same time. So my facility need to have the 6 windows to fulfill the amount of the test. As my site is in one as you can see, my site is although it's outside, but it's very near from the door of the one wing of this terminal. And for the future expansion, because of the 2-wing structure of this airport, if the passenger volume increase like times, another testing facility could be constructed in another corner of this of the second wing of this terminal. And as you can see, this is my bird view rendering of the facility. The door 2 is the entrance for the people come out from the airport and have the test. And after they finish the test, they went to the door 8 to go back to the terminal to continue their next destination. This is my programs. Also, I focus on the 6x6 feet grids because of the safe distance. So like all the programs in my project is based on the its times of 36 square feet. My main concept of this project is about a corridor concept, because the 2 groups of users circulate in this facility. One group is the passenger, and this group should not enter the facility. So the pathway for the circulation for this passenger group is is the negative space compared the circulation space for staff. This is the corridor. The reason that corridor appears, and according to many reports, that the staff endured very high psychological pressure. The corridor in my facility is not it's not a singular circulation functional space, but can have some good impact in spiritual, maybe offering a space for staff to have a relaxed time, a deep breathing. As you can see, the dashed line is for passenger route, and the solid yellow line is for staff route. They share the most big important space is a lab, and the purple one is for the on, the off, and decontamination, and the gray area is for is a contact tracing and the restroom, and in another side of this corridor is a very clean zone for staff to have a break time and a meeting. And this is my massing diagram about the corridor. As you can see, like the yellow L shape is a positive circulation of space for corridor, and I uplift the ceiling of the corridor to make this space half open to the natural, to the public, to have a ventilation. You can see next next drawing, and also like you can see the pink canopy is for passengers to have the test. Actually, it's not a queuing area, but it's a canopy for like the very sunny day and the rainy day. This is my diagram. As you can see, the yellow one is also the corridor, and the pink area is a canopy. I focus on the 6x6 grids and also you can see like the corridor separate the clean space and the hot space to maintain that the more safe area between the working time and the not break time for staff to ensure that their mental thinking and also about their more comfortable feeling. As you can see, this is my project plan. The left entrance is for staff who enter this facility. The route, as you can see, the blue line is for clean route. People go to the office and the changing room and the on space to enter the lab. And after they finish the work, they go to the decontamination first, then go to the off, then have a quick shower, and then exit in another side of this corridor. And also the upper part showing that people enter this facility to go to the restroom, the break room, and also the meeting room. The yellow route is for all sides supplying people to one is for storage for shipping and receiving, and the another is for people who need to take away the decontamination material and the waste. As you can see, the second showing the hot zone and the clean zone, the canopy area and the corridor. The lower part is for staff parking area. This is my interior rendering for contact tracing. And this one is for my entrance for corridor space interior rendering. And this is my project section. As you can see, I showed the side of the contact tracing. People go to the office, and there is a small space for people who need to get closer to the lab to know the to quickly know the information or know what happened in the lab. And also like there have 6 tables for 6 tables or 6 windows for tourists to have the test. And also this is my part of my research is about the transportation and that minimize the risk of disease transfer. So my project design focus on the partition wall, and my partition wall is for some entrance or some doors for that need to make the inside machine to easily transfer from the outside to inside for more safe reasons. And as you can see, the first drawing showed the storage that to maintain that the bigger or larger machine is will be easier or better to transport. And another so like the partition wall in the storage is the horizontal stretching. And another drawing is for office to for the contact tracing. The partition wall is vertical stretching for people to better touch, maybe contact the outside space. Yeah, that's all.
Thank you, Enzi, for your presentation. And last but not least, we will have Tai and Delnaaz present their reaction. So I'll let you two queue up. Enzi, I'll have you mute your video and your mic. All right, take it away. Thank you both.
Hi, I am Delnaaz Karadi.
My name is Tai Wakabayashi.
And our project is From Pandemic Response to Typological Poesis in Catholicism.
These are the images of 3 events that kind of made us think about pandemic and the religiosity of of things. So the MT St. Peter's and the Burn Testing Center and the Reactionary Public Voice to open up churches. So these kind of like gave us the reason to look into to religion, as well as kind of guide us to the direction that we are taking for this project.
After looking at these images, we found an interesting graph of number of times the word prayer was searched on Google, and it saw an exponential hike during the time of COVID-19, which kind of showed us that people are looking towards religion as a structure to rely on in this time of pandemic. And we also looked at the past and the historical pandemics. So in 2nd century, there was plague of Cyprian. And after that plague, lavabo as an architectural element was introduced in the church, which further fermented into being a holy water fountain. So this example kind of shows us how a plague affected an architectural element.
This shows the map with the Catholicism and COVID-19 and where they exist. So black vertical lines represent the total death per country so far, and the circle in red, a transparent red, shows the infected cases per country. And what's superimposed in yellowish brown are the nations or the countries where the Catholicism has significant presence. So we can see geographical relationship between Catholicism and COVID-19.
This is our timeline, and the left side of our timeline shows the major pandemics that has happened throughout the history. And we can see that Black Death was one of the biggest pandemics, which took a death toll of 40 million people. As compared to that, the deaths from COVID-19 is like a small dot.
If we look at on the right side of the slides, we can see that we have about 11.3 million total cases, and we have more than 300. I think it's 500K deaths so far. And then in response to that, we will have testing center. We need a testing center, and then we believe that Catholicism can take a central part in testing. When the pandemic is over, which means that when the death toll is highest, we turn the testing center into memorial so that we can commemorate the death and the human efforts to tackle COVID-19. And the void memorial will continue to ferment itself, and it becomes a new typology until it becomes a ruin.
This is our project strategy. So we look at different factors, like the topmost are the religious factors, which are like faith, church, and priesthood. The lower are the public factors and the social factors like infection, people, and public plaza. And our project weaves into all these facets of society and social structure and creates a typology.
And we are also looking at the universal characteristic of Catholicism in terms of belief and in terms of architectural typology. And by looking at those, by taking advantage of those things, we were able to abstract ideal Catholic church plans so that our intervention will be scalable and replicable, and we can apply that to many parts of the Catholic world. And here is the illustration of our geometrical studies to find the ideal plans on basilica plans. And this is for Latin cross. This is for Gothic churches.
And from these studies, we realized that there is a standard variable X for all these plan forms. And this X is the dimension of the aisle, the entry to the church. And based on that X, we can standardize the dimension of our testing center. So our testing center will be X by Y, and the distance between the church and the testing center would be X divided by 2. This image kind of shows how the testing center would be placed within the plaza and how the people will line up in front of these testing booths.
This is the programs that we have for testing center. We will have walk-in booth and rapid testing lab, on and off, which means decontamination on and off, and a contact tracing office and provider space for the staff members and the service. And we will also have a room and equipments that are listed here.
This is the procedure that will happen in our testing booths, from queuing till disinfecting. And this whole process will take 7 minutes per test. The lower two images, the first one shows the exterior of the testing center and how people and the patients, the red ones are the patients and how they line up in front of the booth. The second one shows the interior of the testing center and how doctors interact with the patients. This is a program adjacency diagram, and you can see that the white zone and the red zone are clearly demarcated. The white zone is the clean zone and the red zone is the hot zone. And there is no conflict in circulation between these two zones.
So when X is 12 meters, we have 4 booths, and thus we have 4 doctors and 8 supporting staff. And since one booth can take 6 patients per hour, there will be 240 tests per day.
And I'll explain the circulation in the testing center step by step. The first circulation is for the patients. They line up in front of the information desk, go to the booth as their chance comes, and they return. So it's a clear circulation. The second circulation is for the doctors. They enter, they go to the locker, D on, enter the lab, D off, and get an exit. So it's a loop, and there's again no conflict in circulation. The last circulation is for the contact tracing officers. They enter, they go to the contact tracing zone, and then they exit. So that is in the clean zone, and they predominantly stay in the clean zone, so they don't have conflict with the hot zones. And the last circulation is of incoming and outgoing of packages. They are placed on the fringes of the building. So the people who are coming from outside don't have to enter the facility and get infected.
So I'm gonna turn our attention to the section diagrams at the bottom. So it'll have 3 different zones, waiting zones and rapid testing contact and contact tracing center, and the gathering zones in front of the church. You can also see that there is the post-chain excavation under the testing center. So the smaller excavation is made for the working booth to have a stronger structural stability, and the bigger excavation will be made for the utilities. And we have axon diagrams on the sides showing the different components of our testing center on top of plaza.
As we said that our project is scalable and replicable. So we have given 2 other examples, one of a plaza bigger than that we were demonstrating, and one of a plaza smaller than the one we were demonstrating. So for Sao Paulo, Brazil, X is equal to 16 meters, and we divided it by 1.8 meter, and we get 5 booths. The second is Santo Domingo in Mexico that we were showing till now. And the third one is San Barnaba in Venice, which has X is equal to 9 meters, and we have 3 booths. For each of them, the Y keeps varying.
And this slide shows the existing and new circulation patterns in the plaza. So in the existing situations, there are church circulations and gathering circulations and Passover circulations. And after the implementation of testing center, we believe that we think it's best to keep the church circulations intact, and we have testing center circulations and Passover circulations, but they are arranged in a way that it's more organized than when it used to be. And this shows the more detailed circulation patterns in the plaza. So it consists of 3 different squares. The biggest one is for the gathering space. We have to accept the fact that people will gather because it's public plaza. Maybe it's after and before mass for the churchgoers, but it'll happen. The gathering will happen, but in a smaller group. And the middle square is to provide a visual caution to those who are passing by. And the smallest square is for the waiting zones to ensure social distancing between those who are waiting for testing.
So we have a blank site. Then first thing we'll do is excavate the voids and put the columns, install the columns. Then we install the walls and the fabric.
And after the pandemic is over, we will turn that testing center into a Boyden Memorial by removing the structure as well as the fabric. And this Boyden Memorial will ferment itself into new typology until, and even after that, it becomes a ruin. And this is the rendering showing the front facade of the building in relation to church, and also showing the different stages of our interventions. One is testing center, and it becomes a Boyden Memorial. And we think that this Boyden Memorial with the slanted columns or extrusions will be appropriate to kind of embody the kind of mixed feeling that we have towards COVID-19. This slide shows the kind of the precedents that we are looking at, as well as how our intervention will follow the typology of Boyden Memorial. So we were constantly thinking about our architecture, or should architecture inherently dramatize monuments or not? And I think we believe that our Boyden Memorial will be able to commemorate the death and human efforts that we have towards COVID-19 without dramatization.
This image shows how the void sits within the plaza and how people can interact with the void and how the void further becomes a part of the plaza. This is the story that we wanted to narrate through our entire project. So there is pre-COVID era where the church and public plaza has normal circulation. And then we go to the COVID-19 phase where there are empty plazas and people don't go to public spaces. And to react to that, we provide testing centers where people can be tested.
Yeah, and then when the pandemic is over, we wrote a 22X. We don't know when it's going to be over, but the exact same spot that this priest is standing will be turned into Voting Memorial. And a couple centuries later, or I don't know how long it'll take, but the space itself will ferment itself, and it becomes a new typology until and even after it becomes a ruin. And with this, we end our presentation. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you both for a very interesting and informative presentation. I ended here because you are thinking about a future use that is a memorial space as opposed to leaving the structure. So at this point, I will ask our reviewers to unmute themselves and to turn on their cameras. And then I will ask Boston AP and NZ to join us as well for a final discussion as we wrap up our final reviews and panel discussion for the Reaction Studio. So any of our reviewers that would like to start with comments, please feel free. And then Tai and Delnaaz, if you would mind muting your mics for the moment, that would be great. Thank you.
Take it away, Benjamin.
I'm going last on this one. I'm letting the wiser people go first.
Dr. Bliss.
Dr. Bliss.
You want me to go first?
Yes.
Hear what you had to say. I had the privilege of seeing Andy in Projector's. Is that how you say your name? Is it close? Anna?
Yes.
That's perfect. Yeah.
Close. I had the privilege of seeing them at midterms. I love their phase approach. Their slides are even more beautiful than they were at that time. They really thought about future use and space usage. Once again, I bring up plants. Not only can you not sterilize them, but they used them outside, but who's going to take care of them? And I think green space is beautiful. And I think that in the future, the green plants will make a difference in whatever they use if somebody has the money to keep them up. I am very practical as a director of my department. If I had money, I never spent it on plants. I always spent it on equipment. So just a thought. I mean, it's good to think about plants. Really good use of space for your consumer, for your patients coming in, and really great lab space for the people who work there. I think, kudos for both of that. For NZ, wow, what can I say? I think I was looking at the future with your drawings. I mean, it's so futuristic and forward thinking. The concept of the corridors and the breathing space, just try to remember to keep it practical because we're still down in the weeds with COVID and you still need to provide space to take because there are no rapid tests. There's no rapid testing now that's really thought to be reliable. It's anywhere from 30 to 80%. So that means you're missing about 50% of it with rapid testing. So just remember that most tests you go to a lab and they have to be corroborated, especially if they're positive. And if, even though they could be negative and people could still have had exposure and just not turn positive yet. I know some people might not like to hear that.
Benjamin.
I really think it's a very forward-thinking approach to public health, especially in a very transient society where we move around all the time, to bring it to where people travel the most on planes. I thought that was very forward-thinking, and also about moving the walls. That was really good. Just remember to keep it a little practicality in the midst of your design. And the last one, wow, I hadn't even thought about plazas that way. I've been to some plazas in Europe and mainly they're used for music festivals and beer festivals and wine festivals. So to use it as a testing center and then turn that void into a memorial is really something. But once again, you have to think about rapid testing is not available. You're not going to find doctors in those centers. You're going to find lab personnel. You're going to find National Guard in those centers. And so think about access to the reference lab. Think about what your staff need to have to make those workable for them. But wow, all very, very moving, all very thought-provoking. And I'm sure I've not said anything about architecture like my two fellow reviewers will say. And I get to say something when they're done, just in case.
We'll leave time for you. We'll yield back to you, as they say.
Okay, good.
And
yeah, go ahead, Benjamin.
no, I was gonna say we'll leave the light on for you.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So I also saw two of these at the mid review. I saw NZ and I saw Delnaaz and Tai's at the mid review. So I'm going to go in the order in which they presented today. I really liked Andy and Projector's approach. The one thing that really struck me, well, after our discussion of the modular approach, right? It was sort of like you guys were, should have been talking instead of me, right? And maybe that's also a project that Yadi should look at in terms of where and how to use the module and not use the module, right? Because your building is not actually 12 by 12 module. It's actually 12 by 18 module, but it still has a common denominator, so to speak, right? And so it's 3 18s and then 12s in the other direction, which still ends up a multiple of 12, right? So, there are ways to bend the module approach, okay? I really appreciated the phased approach. I think, again, as I said the last time, it would be nice to think about the next phase, which is take it away, the takeaway phase. Like, how do we get rid of this thing when we don't need it anymore? And I think as architects, again, it's a phase that we never think about, right? We think about all the phases until our grand edifice is put together, but we never think about the phase of when our grand edifice goes away, because we're probably going to be dead when that happens, right? Well, maybe not actually. So, I mean, my hope is that we're dead when they go away, because that means we're building 50-year buildings instead of 10-year buildings, okay? We're not landfilling everything after 10 years. There's something that you said that I thought was really, really powerful in terms of a way of designing, which is, I think, and I may be paraphrasing a little bit here, design cues for social distancing, which I really appreciated as an approach. Instead of saying there's a rope here and there's a barrier, it's not like you're in line at Disney World for the roller coaster or whatever, right? Where the rope keeps you in line, or at the airport. But rather the design gives you cues about how your body should interact in space with other bodies in space, which to me is very architectural and more natural than saying, here's a rope, don't cross it, okay? And so as an approach, as designers, I really appreciated that. The extent to which you were successful at that is very difficult to tell in a presentation that's so quick like this, okay? But it seemed pretty successful. I think at the site level, it's probably more successful, but you could use that same design cues for social distancing to inform the architecture as well, okay? And that would be an interesting additional step that you might go and revisit the architecture and say, how do we use that very sophisticated idea on the object itself and not just on the site or the plaza or whatever it is that larger scale design intervention, okay? So totally, really appreciate that. Enzi, I know exactly what you're trying to do, and I appreciate what you're trying to do. And so I did something in the meantime, and this again goes to presenting online, right? Because what this allows me to do is to look at the airport over here on my other screen, in Google Earth and go, okay, So here I am at the airport, and I'm trying to find out where you've put this object on the site. And I see a big parking lot out here outside the entrance. And I see that the road that comes out of the airport is elevated. And I'm trying to figure out how people get from the airport to your building, to the testing center, right? And because as we discussed at the mid-review, what you're trying to create is a pinch point, is a filter that keeps people who have COVID-19 from entering China, right? And so the question is, how does your architecture not become an obstacle to that, but rather facilitate that? And right now, you've sort of let everybody out into the wild, so to speak, right? They're all wandering around this parking lot looking for the COVID-19 center, right? And they're out there spreading the virus. There's also a big train station that they can go to. Like you need to create a system that forces people to come to your object, right? And that's where I think it's not a voluntary thing. It's not like, oh, let's go to the Walmart parking lot because I think I might have been exposed. It's basically, I just flew to China and I have to be tested. Okay. And so I think, again, as we talked about at the mid-review, the corridor piece is really important, but I still think you missed it a little bit there. Okay. So I still think you need to go back and say, there's a gap between your object, which is here, and the airport object, which is here. And there's this space in between that's, you know, out in the wild, and you need to keep people from getting there. Does that make sense? Okay. And then the last one, of course, we spent a lot of time talking about, you know, different things at the mid-review with Delnaaz and Tai, and it's a really sophisticated, you know, set of ideas. I'm not sure it went quite as far as I might have wanted it to go since the mid-review. One of the things that I really think you still need to do, I mean, okay, so there's 1.2 billion Catholics in the world, right? So you've left 7 billion people out of the equation. So what happens to all those people, right? Where do they go? What, you know, is there no testing in front of the synagogue? You know, or in front of other places, right? So Delnaaz is going to respond. Go ahead.
So we do understand that there are a lot of other religions and they will also require to be tested. But what we are looking at is that if we do it for each and every religious structure, it has to be at that serious level as we did for Catholic churches. So if we take the essence of our project, we can place it in front of all the religious structures. But given the time constraint, not doing proper justice to each and every religious structure and the plaza in front of it seemed unfair. So we didn't do it. But I do realize that if you take our last storyboard and you place it in front of any religious structure which has a plaza, the essence of it can be worked out.
Right. And I think that that's the strength of the proposal, is that it's a new typology. It doesn't have to be in front of a Catholic church. It can be in front of any religious edifice. And so making that leap beyond the specificity of the Catholic, you know, typology, I think it would be a good thing to try to wrestle with, right? Because I'll let my colleague, Professor Bross, address this a little bit as well, right? But you know, there are some similarities to a lot of these religious typologies are really, really similar, okay? And so I don't think that the typology that you have created requires a church behind it. I just don't. I just don't believe that, okay? I don't think that is a necessity. So I'll leave it there and I'll turn it over to my colleague, Professor Bross.
Oh, thank you very much. And again, a real pleasure to see all this work and to see it in such a brief period of time. So I'm going to get going about my commentaries. First, in the chronological order, we saw Projector and Andy. I really applauded. I enjoyed the process. I enjoyed the way you came across your ideas, how you generated. And I'm, for those of you who know me, you know that I'm a sucker for true integration of site with landscape, and that landscape is architecture, and that architects need to not renounce the role of the exterior with the interior, and in fact to see it as a continuum. So for me, it's absolutely thrilling to see that you approach the landscape with the same degree of care as you did the actual building. And that's actually was part of what's so beautiful about the project to me, was that I agree with Dr. Bliss, the MD, Dr. Bliss, that one has to be very judicious about budget and maintenance. Absolutely. Having said that, there is something to be said about infrastructure that gets built that will live on beyond the purpose of the immediate moment, and something like a landscape that becomes a public gathering space, that becomes the environment that is accessible to all, that whether it's a folly or it's a collection of environments that you move through that become part of the community, the tissue of the community, I think is a great contribution. And it actually lowers the bar on the responsibility of the vertical built space by creating a much more horizontal integration to the city. It gets truly anchored as part of a space. And so what I see it is, there's quite a bit of literature that indicates that the hospitals and places that have places where patients in long-term can walk around the grounds, can look at greenery, I think it would generate healthier recovery rates. Now, this is a very different situation because this is a pandemic response center, and what we are looking at is contagions. Having said that, again, the landscape component to me was astounding. I absolutely flipped when I saw your sketches of the battleship, Chutes and Ladders, and Pac-Man. And I thought, good for you. Good for really taking generative ideas, conceptual driven design of notions of folly, of play. And because these are things that are very near and dear to me. And I admit that I'm a sucker for them. I am, because architecture tends to treat buildings as objects placed in space. And this actually created place as a landscape that you are integrated into. Even the whole diagram approach of how you enter the site off of the street, the notions of the movement through the space, that was all to me really kind of a powerful diagram. As for the planters themselves, I completely agree. Who's going to maintain these? What kind of species are they? Are they xeriscapes? And it actually begs the question, and I wrote down, this seems like a really nice spring through early autumn project. What happens the rest of the year? It seems like, you explicitly said nobody ever goes in. Great. So what happens when it's minus 10 degrees in Boston? And then this is not the place for that to occur, right? So I just would have to push you to think about the use of space. Once you've made that investment, what is the life of that project through its whole process, through a whole year, seasons, and so forth? That's my take. And I agree with Professor Stallmeyer that using design as a cue to understand movement through space is brilliant. And I applaud you. Herman Hertzberger would be really proud of you. Herman Hertzberger was the kind of person who said, it's not just a stair, it's also an auditorium. It's also the surface in which you play chess on. It's also the place where you play ball in. It's a corridor, but it's also a hallway, but it's also a place where people come and talk. This is a hallmark of very human-centered design. And for me, that in itself is already reaching really sophisticated thought processes in very simple expressions. So I like that. But again, my criticism is what happens when it's not ideal weather, when it's rain or snow or ice or sleet? Who maintains it are absolutely valid questions. So I don't know if you have any questions about those comments before I move on. No? Okay. Enzi, I think the strength of your project is in the clarity of the diagram, but I also picked up on what Professor Stallmeyer mentioned, which is where's the connectivity to the actual terminal? whenever you are selecting or segregating populations, which in itself is a very delicate subject, right? As humans, we tend to, at least in a post-fascist world or in a pre-fascist world, we get really antsy about segregation of spaces. And so moving people from one space to another implies a lot of social political issues that you're wading into eyes closed. And by not making it an organic filtering movement from the terminal on, it starts to open up those questions. You know, who moves you, why, where, when, how do you get to that space? The L shape itself, one of your strengths is the diagram, the clarity of the separation of the two types of spaces and the form that it generates. Having said that, if we looked at the tectonics, it worries me that you are drawing roofs as literally 6-inch thick modernist slabs that tend to be, for me, not really realistic as to how roofs are put together and what it goes underneath the roof and parapets and water. So it needs to be revisited so that you understand the tectonics of how things are put together and what the implications are in thicknesses, drop ceilings, etc., because of the implications. Now, I understand you don't have a full semester of 4 months to work things out, but nonetheless, even at the level you're at, I would have allowed for, in your sections, for more depth in the sections, more depth in these elements to account for that. And that's when I noticed, because I was looking at that, I noticed that your partition systems have the same problem. On one hand, I think partition systems, as you have presented them, are an excellent idea. They are actually a very good ad hoc system for separation that allows you for flexibility for larger. I mean, go to any convention center, including the iHotel here in Champaign, and you'll see that partition systems are used to make a larger room or a smaller room, and it can be quite effective acoustically. Having said that, what year are you in, Enzi? Are you in your first or second year? Sorry, you're muted.
First.
I want you to go to a place like the Alumni Union, the Union Building, or go to iHotel and look at those partition systems, because one of the things that will dawn on you is that they're heavy. And that means if you look at your drawings, the rail system that these things are on are nowhere near as thin as you presented them. And they have a spatial implication. If you go to the iHotel, you'll see that they're at least a good 24 to 36 inches of structure above them holding these partition systems. Otherwise, they're a miserable, from life experience, I can tell you that a badly designed, it'll start to hang and a partition system will never work the way you want it, because it'll just be grinding against the ground, or it won't even move. So they require some really good, again, I'm not asking you to calculate the joist that's holding it, just conceptually say, I'm gonna need 24 inches of just structure to hold these partition systems because of the weight. And so that all of a sudden starts to create depth in your drawings. Does this make sense? Right? Okay. But nonetheless, a lot of it was already covered by my fellow jurors. Now I'm gonna move to the third presentation, which is, excuse me, Tai and Delnaaz. I have to confess, I'm very partial to this project in many ways. First of all, I agree with Professor Stallmeyer in terms of what goes next. But on the other hand, for me, the site specificity of using a generative design approach, one that isn't afraid to use, it's never going to be about whether you chose the right generative process or not, because that's up to you and frankly, the market to decide. It's the fact that you chose one and that you were consistent about the way you generated a form and you created rules for yourself that then are applied. And for me, the way I defend the project and why I'm partial to it is that Professor Stallmeyer is absolutely right. How does this apply in front of a mosque or in front of a synagogue or in front of Baha'i? It's that you've created a set of rules and it's a proof of concept that you can then apply. And not only that, it's because you're relating to the object itself, the spatial object behind and the plaza. those rules become generative that are site-specific, contextualist, and historic without necessarily being kitschy in the aesthetic that it finally realizes. And I think that those are the grounded things that give specificity to space, that make it feel like it was born from something and it's a continuum in the vast history of spatial production. It's not fetishizing the object of the moment, but rather that it's, even if the aesthetic ultimately ends up being contemporary tensile structures, there's something about the timelessness of a continuum, even if your personal expression is contemporary. And that for me is incredibly powerful. Having said that, your next challenge is to show the set of rules that have to be applied to other spaces that are about continuous spatial expressions, because otherwise it just becomes a stilted one-off. It really has to be about these other projects. My next step, though, and my criticism about that is you leave these voids, which are very powerful as symbols, but they're also future problems. Just the basic concept. It rains. Where does the water go? Does it fill up? And then, you know, over time, it creates fissures in the concrete and you get problems in the plaza below. If somebody's not paying attention, do they trip and hurt themselves? And therefore, what's supposed to be poetic actually ends up being dangerous, because ultimately in a human-centered design, as poetic as these spaces are, they still have to do the most basic thing, which is life and safety, right? I mean, for me, these are just downright basic things. This is, you use these two presidents that are very powerful, the 9/11 memorial, and what else? There was another president to use. Help me out. What was the other president? 9/11 memorial and
Jewish Museum.
Okay, none of those are trip hazards, right? You need to, in fact, what Libeskind did there in the Jewish Museum is that it's actually a long niche, a long, very uncomfortable 5-story space with sculptural elements placed on the ground that are faces or face-like elements that you engage in, and you're not really supposed to walk into it. It's actually kind of uncomfortable. I've been there. It's dark. It's meant to make you feel small and constrained, but you don't really walk into it. And even if you did, it's on grade. Okay, so that in itself. Whereas if you go to the memorial, 9/11 memorial, I forget the name of the artist who did the 9/11 memorial. I think Ron Arad. I think it's Ron Arad who did the 9/11 memorial.
Yeah.
He puts a parapet around it and puts the names of the people on the parapet on an element, so that creates a physical barrier so you can't jump over and fall in. Because if you fall in, it's not a happy moment. If you look into that void, it's a big problem, right? So it's not on grade. So that brings up a whole series of challenges that you were going to have to look at as going forward. Do you cover it in glass, and therefore it becomes like many of these museums where you go through the archaeology on top of it, but looking down into it so you don't trip and fall and water gets into it? Who knows? It's part of the exploration you have to do. And that takes me to another point to the project by Andy and Projector. You use steel on grade in your structural system. Normally, those are concrete on grade beams, not steel. Just so you look at that again. If you look, the diagram you use to the steel, after you put the columns, you put structural steel on grade. It's usually concrete that is the on grade beam. Just a comment. I was just thinking about that. All right, so those are my observations and comments. I am thrilled at the quality of work and excited to see this in your portfolios, you know, with the tweaks you have to do and so forth. But certainly kudos to the instructor for the work that has been produced.
Dr. Bliss, do you have anything you want to comment?
Yes, of course I do. They told me I could have a few minutes at the end. One of the things after listening to my fellow reviewers is the concepts that each of the three did and how they fit into the space and the advice that you get from people who know what they're doing and can explain what's going on, and then from their professor, you telling them how to work this all out. To me, I think they all got the message that this is not a gathering place, it's a testing place, and what's left in the aftermath, especially with this last group of 3. I could see NZ maybe modifying the structure to be in the middle of the airport, right? In that, because usually they have high ceilings, except for in France where they box you in like little French sardines. But you could put this and just grab the people as they're getting off the planes and maybe modifying the airport. She could do a lot of work on, okay, this is how you're going to test them, and this is how we're going to modify them to move them into quarantine. I mean, the concepts are also beautiful for the future, and what can be done with a pandemic that's causing us such pain now, turning into something that would be good for the future. I think all of them got that. And I wish I knew more about architecture and could follow all the terminology, but I thought it was wonderful.
Thank you for your comments. We are going to wrap up at this point, so I will thank both Professor Bross and Professor Stallmeyer for taking your time out of your summer, and thank you, Dr. Bliss, for your medical expertise throughout the course of the summer session. We've appreciated having you now 3 times join us in class. And my students know I'm thrilled with their work. For 4.5 weeks of design, this is a lot more than I could have asked for, so I appreciate all of the work that you did. So thank you very much. I'll remind everyone to stay safe, wash your hands, and wear a mask. We hope all of you enjoyed watching our presentation, so we are going to sign off of YouTube now. Thank you so much.